We're in a time right now where the government isn't necessarily following court orders. So we're having to strategize around, well, what if they do this that's illegal? What if they do that that's illegal? And probably the biggest change since January 20th really is how many scared people I deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Welcome to Criminal Injustice, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on America's broken legal system. I'm your host, Casey Krizman, a criminal defense attorney and former criminal defendant. I fight in the trenches to defend those caught in the machinery of our so-called justice system. Each month, we bring you raw conversations with activists, advocates, and experts who are working to expose systemic oppression and create real change for the system and for the people caught up in it. But we don't just highlight problems, we focus on solutions. You'll hear inspiring stories of resistance and resilience and learn concrete ways that you can take action. The fight against criminal injustice starts now. And welcome back to another episode of Criminal Injustice with Casey Krizman. Today we have our guest, Andrew Younkins. He's an attorney on the front lines these days as ICE agents sweep up immigrants across the state. Andrew represents individuals and families caught up in the immigration net. He is actively involved in the Colorado chapter of the American Immigration Law Association. In addition to taking cases privately, Andrew accepts cases through the Colorado Immigration Justice Fund. He's volunteered and worked from the Colorado Asylum Center and has actually assisted hundreds of Venezuelan asylum seekers. I look forward to getting his take on the anti-immigrant climate in our country right now. Thank you for being here, Andrew.
It's my pleasure.
Some dark times right now for the immigration community. What has your life been like since January 20th of 25?
Well, I would say that there's been more worry than just being busy. In Spanish, it's más preocupación que ocupación. Things are changing very rapidly. Yeah. I feel like I have to pay attention not only to the strictly legal developments that happen around me, but what's said on our professional listserv as far as what courts and agencies are doing, and just the news generally to understand what pressures that the government is putting on its own people and its agencies in order to accomplish its goals.
And so when we're in these early stages of the worry turning into problems, do we have any idea where it's going to pop up day to day, or is it just with the rise of the sun comes a new issue?
Well, it's very difficult to know when and where the next ICE raid is going to be. Right? So we're looking and thinking about all future possibilities. For instance, the government uses a tool called expedited removal to take people from the country and remove them from the country near the borders. It's supposed to be used within 200 miles of the border. We're already starting to think about whether the government and how the government is going to use the expansion of that authority in order to deport more folks. We're in a time right now where the government isn't necessarily following court orders. So we're having to strategize around, well, what if they do this that's illegal? What if they do that that's illegal? And probably the biggest change since January 20th really is how many scared people I deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Right. And so when we're talking about when the government potentially does these things illegally and not listening to court orders, can we trust the courts to push back enough to stop this?
So far, we're seeing a lot of pushback in general on Trump's immigration priorities. I think a fourth judge today issued an injunction against his declaration against birthright citizenship. So, judges, even judges who are appointed by Trump and appointed, by other Republican presidents, have a very strong idea of the rule of law, right? I mean, you don't go into that kind of a position unless you have such an idea. So we're starting to see that pushback, but will Trump listen to these district courts? How will these issues get in front of the Supreme Court, and ultimately, will he listen to the Supreme Court? I think are really issues that remain to be decided.
And it's almost, in just that answer, you touched on so many different specific immigration issues that it's hard to keep up.
That's correct.
So what, in your opinion, and I know that folks may not know that immigration law is a strictly federal type, or maybe fill me in on that.
Most immigration issues are controlled by federal law. There's always going to be an intersection with state law. Okay. For example, how do state law enforcement authorities interact with federal authorities? To what extent are they going to cooperate? Right. To what extent, when they determine that someone's undocumented, are they going to be contacting the federal authorities? That widely vary, not only by state, but by locality to locality.
And that's the whole argument about whether Denver's a sanctuary city or other cities are. Is that essentially a broad stroke?
It can be. Sanctuary city is going to be something that's defined again on that state and local level by the jurisdiction that's passing such an ordinance or a law. So exactly where is a sanctuary? What does a sanctuary city mean? How is the city going to resist or cooperate with authorities in certain situations? It's heavily locally determined.
And we're seeing that right now here in Denver. We have Mayor Mike Johnston, who's being summoned to Capitol Hill to discuss his policies with regard to whether or not Denver uses their funds to enforce immigration policy. And there's actually a Senate bill on the floor right now under consideration trying to essentially remove those current limitations on the money that that Colorado spends. Mm-hmm. So even though these are largely federal issues, the effects are local. And what would you recommend to folks here in the community in terms of what they can do to help this situation?
Okay. So one thing to keep in mind is that in addition to the strict immigration policy changes that are going on right now, we're seeing all kinds of funding that's being cut to all kinds of nonprofit organizations. Right. Grants that are disappearing and drying up. The courts aren't working with those nonprofits anymore. So they're needing funds right now. If people have funds to donate to organizations like that, I really would advocate that they look up organizations like that. So we talked about Colorado Immigrant Justice Fund, right? Okay. Remain, the Rocky Mountain Advocacy and Immigration Network, is a big, big organization in Colorado that does a ton of work, especially with immigrant children, to get them status. So people can donate to those organizations. They can also find ways to volunteer with those organizations. Okay. And there are many, many other local organizations in Colorado that do similar kinds of work. People need to realize, I think, that this isn't an issue that strictly is going to impact people who don't have legal status in the United States. It impacts people who have legal status other than citizenship. For example, people who have green cards, people who have temporary statuses. Right. They're going to be caught up in these dragnets. There's going to be a lack of discrimination. Even people who may fit a certain racial or ethnic description are going to be caught up in this dragnet. Okay.
And anyone who thinks otherwise is not being honest with themselves.
They're not paying attention to what's going on already in the state of Colorado and the raids that we're already seeing and the efforts that ICE is already making in order to turn neighbor against neighbor. There was a raid in a housing complex, and so ICE puts tape on people's doors. They were putting, I believe, this is correct, red tape on the doors of people that they think might potentially be somebody that they can arrest, and yellow on the doors of people who wouldn't cooperate with them. Wow. Okay, so this is like firsthand information that we're getting about ICE practices.
That's scary.
I think it is. I mean, the main thing that's preventing more of this is the fact that they simply don't have the officers, the jail beds, and the other resources that they need at this time in order to do more. You're already seeing ICE officials being demoted and reassigned because their arrest numbers are not considered high enough by Kristi Noem and the other heads of DHS.
So a lot of us here in the metro area were alarmed on February 5th when the multiple raids occurred, especially Cedar Apartment Complex and throughout the metropolitan area. What can you tell us about what's occurred since then? You know, a lot of times the news doesn't follow up after the sensational part of that story.
Well, It's hard to say strict numbers-wise what's the most common way that they're arresting people right now, but we are seeing increased enforcement against individuals who have removal orders, people who go in for routine check-ins. People may not, who are listening may not be aware that there's an organization called ESOP. I'm forgetting what the acronym stands for, but they mediate a lot of the interactions between people who have removal orders and ICE itself. So they're doing the check-ins for ICE for people who have removal orders or came into the country and were released after they crossed the border and are awaiting a date in court or awaiting the adjudication of an asylum application. So people have to go in and make check-ins, and we're seeing much more routinely that people are being arrested in those situations.
And that's something where they are trying to follow the process that's put into place.
Right.
And then they're getting, sprung upon at that meeting.
In a way that wasn't happening a year ago, absolutely.
Okay. So, that obviously creates a fear in the community, and it's trampling on people's rights. Aside from donating, we've had attorneys go out, when we heard of a raid, we've run out there and given advice. What do folks who have been approached by law enforcement, what do they have to do when they're approached by someone, by law enforcement?
Right. So it's very similar to other criminal justice situations where if you're detained by the immigration police, you should ask, am I being detained? And if they say that you are not, you should say, am I free to go? The amount of things that you should say is very limited. Mostly, you should exercise your right to remain silent in those situations. You do not have to let people into your house, ICE into your house, unless they have a judicial warrant in any situation. There are a host of other pieces of advice that are right now pretty commonly being given to people who are afraid themselves of being picked up.
You don't have to give your name unless there's reasonable suspicion for a crime or for a traffic stop.
Right, basic
Would you
criminal law.
recommend non-citizens carry their passports right now?
We do not recommend that they carry their passport with them or any other document from a foreign country, like a tax identification. Those are not the things that you want to have on you.
What do you want to have on you?
What you would want to have on you would be your employment authorization document, if you have one. Okay. Proof that you have filed an asylum application, if you have done so. If you're in front of the immigration court, you want to carry some sort of a document showing that you're in that process, okay, and that you're complying with that process, such as a scheduling order. What's pretty common in the immigration courts, because they are so busy, is that people file an application and file their pleadings, and then they're given an order saying, well, we're putting you in the general trial queue. If somebody has an attorney, this is a very, very common situation that they're going to be in.
Okay.
All right. So you can solicit that from your attorney. You can also solicit a letter from your attorney saying, hey, here's what's going on. This person has an active process going on. Okay. Those would be the main things that I think that folks can carry.
Okay, so, and just to recap, we want to, when we come to contact with law enforcement, am I being detained? Am I free to go? You don't necessarily have to give your name unless they have reasonable suspicion to require it. And we don't want to be carrying any documents that show you're from another country or that were issued by another country. You want documents from the United States saying that you are somehow in the process if you happen to be in the process.
I think that's right. And one other thing that you could carry around are the so-called red cards that are basically just cards telling you what to do if you get encountered, and that you have a right to remain silent. Your right to remain silent is very, very important, because anything that you say to any kind of law enforcement, including ICE, can and will be used against you. And they're not going to tell you that. They're not going to Mirandize you to tell you your Miranda rights in the same way that other law enforcement are trained to.
Okay. And we'll put in the show notes how people can get a copy of those red cards and keep those on hand, right? That's something that's readily available online.
Yes.
We'll also have the links to those charities and those nonprofits that are doing the work that they're doing.
Great.
So, Explain what kind of impact can an immigration attorney have on this final outcome, this fight that we, maybe right now in the battles that we're fighting right now, but in the bigger picture in the war, what can someone like you or other immigration attorneys, or to the extent that my limited experience allows, where do we fit? How can we win this war?
So on a formal level, there are many, many different ways in which having an immigration attorney will positively impact your immigration situation.
Okay.
I mean, not only do we have much more experience in filling out forms correctly, making sure that the proper filing fees get paid on applications to the government, but there are a whole raft of statistics showing that in immigration court, if you have an attorney, you are just going to do better with whatever kind of case you have.
Right.
So asylum and withholding of removal are key remedies against deportation, and they're things that people apply for at some point after coming into the country.
Right.
And they both have to do with persecution. The basic idea is you have a subjective fear of danger in the other country, and you show that it's objective as well, reasonable, and then you show that you fit in with one of the specific categories that U.S. law protects, such as persecution based on race, religion, or being member of a particular social group in the other country. I've just said a mouthful,
Yeah. So,
right? Yeah.
So, and bringing it back to just having legal counsel makes such a big difference. I've stepped foot in immigration court once. It was for a person that my father had been working with through a nonprofit himself. He was an asylum seeker, had been languishing in court with just continuance after continuance, no answers, out at the facility in Aurora for so long. Mm-hmm. I finally just walked in because I had the credentials. And on that date, at that court appearance, without my saying anything, the judge released him. He's doing great, by the way. He's here in America. His family is here. He's holding down a job, making good on his attempt for the American dream. And so we caught up with him recently, and it's beautiful.
That's wonderful.
So these are the types of success stories on that micro level that you can provide, or other immigration attorneys can provide. Right.
Sometimes it really is just speaking the judge's language, so to speak, and making the judge feel at ease with the things that you're presenting. One of the situations that's very, very common where attorneys make the most difference are in immigration bond proceedings.
Okay.
All right. So some people who are detained by immigration authorities, but not all, are going to be eligible to pay a money bond and get out of detention and be released, and then after have to attend their immigration proceedings in a non-detained court like the one we have downtown in Denver.
Okay.
But in order to get that bond, you are going to have to show that you are not a flight risk, meaning you have some stability in the United States,
Sure.
Your criminal record isn't particularly long, and you're not a danger to the community.
Indeed.
Right? So you have to show both those things. And the judge is going to expect documentation to help to prove that,
Sure.
okay? That you have a stable place to live, someone else can vouch for you if you're new in the country. They're going to want to know if you have a criminal charge or criminal conviction or multiple criminal convictions. They're going to want to know all about those things. One of the most common and heartbreaking mistakes that I see is that people ask for a bond hearing in immigration detention because they are desperate to get out,
Right.
Understandably, but they don't have any of those things ready. And it's a one bite at the apple situation. Right. There's a preclusive effect where once you have that bond hearing, if the judge denies the bond, you have to show changed circumstance. It's
Right.
not enough just to make a showing of no danger, no flight risk. You have to show that something changed between that bond hearing and the subsequent bond hearing. It's a heartbreaking situation that I see.
Does retention of counsel, can that be one of those reasons?
The counsel is necessary to present the correct documentation and correct argumentation around those issues, to tell the story in a way that the judge can understand very easily.
And we need to be able to make the judge comfortable with setting a bond and letting this person remain free while these proceedings.
Yes.
I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but it's a little bit ironic that we have to demonstrate ties to the community while they're trying to deport them. But there's a lot that doesn't make sense in the immigration courts, I suppose.
Absolutely, especially with these bond situations. You would think that bonds in immigration court have some relationship to bonds that are set in other settings, right? In state courts. There is no relationship between those things. If you see a $1,000 bond in a state court, that in no way will help you to predict what an immigration judge is going to do. It's its own set of law.
So if we're looking at this from a perspective of we want to find solutions to the issues that surround folks wanting to be in America, you know, if you had your druthers, if you got to choose the future, what would it look like?
Gosh. Of course, everyone's going to think, well, what's different than what we have is an open border situation, right? Okay. I don't know if open borders are the best solution to the problems that we have today, which are problems of commerce, which are problems of the movement of people. You see very unfair situation. I mean, people who've been here 20 years, brought over here when they're 3 years old, they can't go see their dying grandparents in Mexico. Right. You know, there should be some kind of just solution to these situations. I believe that the laws that were put in place surrounding asylum were really put in place to cover a variety of different kinds of danger that people were in and to aspire to really, really lofty moral goals about what America is and the kinds of people that we bring in, the kinds of people that we give shelter to, and to really be a welcoming country. I think that that kind of policy is what should dictate what the specific legal rules are.
And are you telling me that the statutes, the rules on the books right now embrace that, and we just need to read the rules with that open-armed embrace?
I think what Congress has said in the Immigration and Nationality Act embody those ideals. And when they're interpreted faithfully, they, in most situations, embrace bringing more people in and allowing more people to stay, and an expansive view of stopping persecution. But a lot of our laws, again, they give big discretion to the executive, right, the president, right, over who gets protected and who doesn't. Right. We just saw temporary protected status that was enacted and put into place by Biden for Venezuelans. Now Trump is pulling that back. Right. There are people who had temporary protected status past a certain date. That's all going to be curtailed as of, I believe, April 1st for Venezuelan folks.
Right, so we would need these statutes to be interpreted faithfully, and we'd need to have some sort of discourse that was deeper than a 24-point headline.
Well, I think you really said it. I mean, gosh, you can encounter folks who are really anti-immigrant, right, and have some awful ideas about what people who've come over the border without a visa are up to and are like. But those things really melt away in the face of personal experience, don't they?
Indeed.
Right? They meet somebody or they're working with somebody and they say, gosh, this person is just the hardest worker and the nicest person, and they're an undocumented person. And then there's a justification that goes on for the way that things are, right? Oh, well, most of them aren't like this. Right. You know, there are so many criminals, you know, right, that kind of thing.
It's not fair in this one instance, whereas turns out the personal experience allows each instance to be unfair.
That's a very good way to put it, yeah.
Given where we are right now in the times, and given where we are in the forum, what does it mean to fight against the criminal injustice system right now, and what can we do to help protect ourselves in the next 90 days, 6 months, a year?
I think that we have to start talking to our neighbors a little bit more than we have been. I think that we have to have those hard conversations. People who have these negative ideas about undocumented folks and about immigrants, I think that we, as educated people listening to a podcast, need to take a new tact in talking to those folks about what's going on. I mean, things are so negative right now with the political situation. People are just shocked by every single thing that's going on. Right. But for people to understand that ignorance about what's going on in other people's lives and just false ideas about the world, I think that we have to approach those things in a loving and compassionate way to the extent we can with whom we can.
Incredibly said. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, and at the risk of saying it a third time, thank you so much for the work you're doing. Keep it up and let us help you in any way.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure to be here.